All right, good evening and welcome to another day in Tertuliando en Cuarentena. Today we're in English mode. So you'll notice that bit of a shift from episode to episode. We go from English to Spanish. Hopefully, one day we'll go to German, but I will not serve it justice. So tonight we actually have joining us from the southern part of California in Encinitas, actually near Mexico. So without any further ado, I'll bring our guests and we'll come inside. We'll begin this tertuliando. Ryan, ¿cómo estás? How are you, my friend?
Muy bien.
I understand you're. I mean, you're quite near Mexico, no? I mean, you're
Oh yeah.
relatively
I
ahí
think
next to Tijuana.
maybe 40 minutes across the border. Easy.
Have you done the venture yet, crossing the
Yeah, I
border?
actually lived down here in high school for a little while. And then when I was first married as well. And we used to cross the border all the time. Before September 11th, it was like we could at 5 p.m. we could be like, "Do you want to do dinner in Tijuana?" Like it was no big deal. And now it's so much more going on there, obviously. But absolutely love going down there. In fact, one of the reasons I live down here now is I miss good Mexican food. Seattle doesn't
Uh,
have it, man.
Oh man, I bet they have like like the food trucks here and there, but not the same as being
I've
just
tried
right
them,
there close to the
man.
border.
I mean, obviously Mexico is a huge country.
See,
So to say like they have good Mexican food in Seattle is like saying they have good Mexican food in one particular part of Mexico. It's a particular kind of Mexican food,
yeah,
right? You have so many different kinds of Mexican food in Mexico. So same thing in the US. Like I like San Diego Mexican food, or Tijuana Mexican food. This is probably not why you want to talk to me. I love
I,
Mexican food, dude.
I
I
well, I
love
am. Oh,
Mexican food.
there's always space to talk about good food. There's always
I
space
do,
to talk
man. I
about good
love
food.
tacos.
Well, man, thank you so much for coming along. Daringly coming along. That this is kind of like the story with many of the people that come along. So that speaks a lot about yourself. Maybe about your daringness or just the fact that you're completely clueless as to what you
That's
go.
okay. Cool. I'm supposed to be here then. Excellent.
Both make quite a good dance. So I really do appreciate it, nonetheless,
Yeah.
in a serious appreciation. So this space, I actually I enjoy having the plural, the the plurality of guests that I've had because everyone comes from a different life experience, and I learn and I unlearn many things. So I know today won't be the exception. So thank you, gracias. I like to start talking about our current context and our current situation
Sure.
and this time of very real transition in the pandemic. And I know you just recently moved to California, and I know that's a transition in and of itself. But there's also this transition that kind of caught us, I guess we can say, off guard mid March. And I wanted to get to know and hear what has your experience been in that realm with what things were before COVID, during COVID, and what that transition has been like for you. And also, I would like to hear about what your observations, in terms of society, has been like in
Hmm.
this time, and kind of like your assessment of what these last 3 months have been like.
Hmm. Well, after 15 years in the Northwest, my family and I decided it was time for a change. I'd been leading publicly for 15 years in the Seattle area, and that comes with blessings and curses. So it was time for just some relaxation. 15 years of some pretty intense times of leading publicly, um, and then I had cancer in 2017, and so it was kind of like, what do I want to do? And it was
Mm-hmm.
time to take a year and relax and heal and focus on my physical health and take the stress level down. So we moved in January, and it was amazing. And then March hit, and my financial situation took a monster hit, and um, some of the things that I had been hoping to sort of bridge the gap for our family during a time of like relocation and not really having another job, kind of went out the window. So we've been kind of like going, okay, well, this changes things. And so I guess the way we've been handling it or experiencing it is just open-handedly realizing that, hey, we're not in control. We had plans. Those plans are not going to be the same. And I really have no idea how the summer and the fall go and the winter go. And so I guess just learning at a personal level to do the things I talked about for years, which is to live in trust in the middle of uncertainty and to stay close to my own practices so that I can, regulate my own nervous system. So I'm not throwing my stress out on my kids or those around me. And so, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that, nobody in my family's been ill. Nobody that I know has gotten, one person got COVID. So I wouldn't pretend like it's been a huge suffering for me. As far as what I see and observe, I think it's been an opportunity to recognize that we still live on a fear frequency, most of us. And anytime we are reminded of the ever-present truth that we're not in control, we shut down, like we close our hearts and we defend. And that's just a really unproductive, very what am I trying to say? Just uncreative space to be thinking from, right? The part of our brain that we retreat to is not a creative genius. And so watching that play out for sure. And, I mean, depending on who you talk to and what their political persuasion is, their particular brand of conspiracy theory, can be yours for the taking, right? So that's been interesting to watch a country that's already, since the inauguration of Donald Trump. I think the issues begin far sooner than that, but the heat turned up at least in 2016. And so, yeah, just kind of paying attention and watching and trying to do my best as I still speak sometimes for Eastlake. And when I do, trying to offer some sense of, let's keep our thinking caps on here, because when human beings in groups get stressed, we make really poor choices generally out of fear. So that's probably the main thing I've noticed.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I like that you mentioned this whole, like the offering of conspiracy theories that people might attach to, and I think that plays into also what we might feel comfortable with embracing, what we might kind of like pillow up to cozy up to that.
Absolutely.
It makes us feel a little bit rest easy.
Yeah. Even if it's terrible.
Yeah. Nevertheless, yeah.
Because the
terrible, true.
knowing is what we want, right? It's the
See.
knowing.
Yeah.
So if it's like,
Certainty.
well, there's an alien base on the moon, and the reptilian, beings from planet whatever have come down, and they're telling Trump all the insider information, and they're going to nuke us all, or whatever else it is. The content is less important. I think the phenomenon is nonpartisan, because the phenomenon is, I want to know what's happening, because ultimately underneath that is, I'm afraid, and knowledge is power. And if I have a sense of, control via information, then people feel like they can sleep at night.
And man, like when you're saying, like you were saying before, that the element of stress and the element of fear, kind of like mixing itself up, it does not usually lead, or at least it does not usually lead within the context we're talking about, to good creative outcomes. It usually comes out in this rampant reaction. And when you have so many things informing us from so many different angles, and they're all coming from fear-based nurturing, it can be quite scary. It can be quite scary, and I think like for example, I've only been living here. I mean, I lived here for a little bit when I was a kid, but like as of recently in my adulthood, this has just been a year. I was living in Germany as of the last 4 years, and kind of experiencing the U.S. mode in my own skin and kind of savoring it. There are moments where it's quite surreal. There's moments where it's quite
I
surreal.
bet. I bet.
I'm like, this is not a sitcom. This is this is happening
Yeah.
as I'm seeing it. Um, I like to give my guests the opportunity to talk a little bit about their lives, and I think in I framed a question of if they can share at least three experiences in their life, and in their whole life. It could be as far as you can remember, when you're a little kid,
Mhm.
to as recently as an hour ago, that you feel were experiences and times where some cathartic thing was happening. Maybe later on you kind of look back on it and you defined it as such. As you're going through things, the level of revelation is not quite there, but it could have been specific moments. It could have been processes you went through that you can point to. At least three. You can give more, but that you recognize them to be, wow, these were transformative moments in my pilgrimage, in my journey, in my odyssey of life.
Mhm. Hmm. Um, sure. I think if I were to pick the most transformative experience of the three that come to mind at least as most transformative, the first would have to be um, meeting my wife. I mean, and this is kind of like a sweetheart story. I mean, we started dating when we were 15 and 16, but I
Oh
mean,
wow.
it was like if that we were naming our kids immediately, like, and our two oldest are the names we picked out when we were 16 and 17. So, I don't really cling to a particular metaphysical perspective or paradigm, but it just the sense, my felt experience of partnering with her for over the last 20 years in marriage, and then before that dating, it's just that it's just been fated. Like, I crossed paths with someone who has radically altered, and I would say amplified, whatever I bring to the world, and we do that for one another. And so, um, encountering her and continually encountering her has grown me and healed me, and like I say, supported me to be able to do and journey and accomplish things that I never could have done on my own without the safety and commitment of that kind of a relationship at that level. And I'm every day grateful for the healing space that it is. Not just a safe space in sort of like this repressive denial sense, but like it's
Mm-hmm.
a safe space to transform within, and I
Mm-hmm.
have space to change in her presence. And I don't think there's anything that's been more transformative than that. Um, Moving from that, you know, um, that for 15 years I had been lead pastor of a church I started in Seattle in 2005, and it was an evangelical church with, like, with jeans on, whatever that means, like hipstery young folks that are essentially fundamentalists, but you know we watch the same shows as you do, and we like beer or whatever. I don't know. It's funny to think about now, um, but one of the things that really just rocked my world in about 2010, 9 or 10, is I read. I had already tried to read it a year or two before, but I put it down because I was like, I'm too stupid to read this. It was Ken Wilber's book, A Brief History of Everything. And it was so jarring to my worldview that I got scared. And what happened was it launched me on a trajectory of all these other books that I would then finish and look in the bibliography, and I'd read those books.
Mm.
And I was venturing off into this land of books that I was not supposed to read. These are all the evil people out there, God haters, heretics. And after a good year of reading all that stuff, it was kind of the first time I knew, in the middle of leading this big, successful mega church of young people, I was like, oh, this is going to go poorly. There's no positive, sweet little end of this. Like, this is going to happen. It's going to be public, and it's going to hurt. And that was an interesting sort of turning point. And then they just started to stack up after that in my life.
You only can pick three.
Yeah, like burying my grandfather was a huge one. 2014, I think, right after 3 months in Southeast Asia, just all over the place in some of the, poorest places on earth, which, I'm in the house of a Hindu family, and I'm experiencing more of what I would have called back then, like the presence of Christ.
Mm-hmm. And this is going on as you're still a pastor, eh?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just going around, the whole idea just became absurd to me, that I have the truth, that I know what the word God means, and that others in these places of the earth, they need the information I possess. It just immediately, I could no longer hold on to it. And I came back from that and buried my grandfather. And while I was pouring his ashes out in this beautiful place in Central Oregon that he loved, it just occurred to me that, like, what I was trying to build at my evangelical church, my grandpa was almost none of the things that I was trying to turn people into, but he was a beautiful human being. And I was thinking, if the world was full of a bunch of people like my grandfather, it would be a beautiful world. And I'm just not so sure the world needs what I'm trying to produce anymore. So that was a big turning point. And then about the end of that year, I started teaching differently. And that was probably the biggest sort of life shift. I experienced, I guess what you would call in the astrology world, the Uranian opposition, where my whole life was going to get thrown upside down, and I knew there was no escape from it. And so I just started teaching things that were explicitly not evangelical and maybe not really Christian. And that started the church to unravel, but it was more like shaky ground than really unraveling. And then in January of 2015, Time Magazine put out an article that we were slowly and silently becoming the first or largest evangelical church to go open and affirming. And that did it. I mean, the dam broke, and it was like within a couple months, we'd lost thousands of people and millions, we hadn't lost millions yet, but we were running an organization that was, we had a budget of $7.5 million a year.
Wow.
Per year. And I mean, that got overcut in half in that first year. And and the problem was we didn't stop there. I kept moving further and further outside of the boundary lines of traditional or fundamental Christianity. And I thought I would land and find a home in like progressive Christianity or Anabaptist theology or something. I kept moving further and further out, trying to protect or save whatever nugget of beauty was still in there. And as the years went by, I realized I'm trying to call something Christianity out of sentimentality here. I've moved outside of that country now. And yeah, it was just a long process of taking one step at a time.
Would that be the third one, or?
Yeah, sure.
No. I mean, like I said at the beginning, you can share as many as you feel.
Sure.
We're definitely marking your life.
I'll tell you two more briefly.
Dale.
After that year and so many conversations, because when you're a megachurch pastor and you're like, again, kind of in that hip, cool, hipstery, whatever. I was still incredibly young to be leading a church that size and with that success. I just had my ego handed to me. I mean, I got so beat up that year. Like everyone who loved me immediately hated me. Like I went from Jesus Christ superstar to Satan incarnate overnight over the issue of saying, I think gay people are okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that we're the ones with the problem that need to, but the people who I thought were friends, I mean, I realized very quickly that I performed a role for people. I was a figure of something, I was more symbolic than I was a human being to them. And again, that's not something that was their issue. That's just something about anytime you take a badge, you put a badge on, you let go of the humanity. Like if you're going to take up the sword, then don't get pissed when people treat you like you're swinging a big sword, So I just say that to say that I was naive, and I realized like, who really knows or cares about me? Because I have violated some sort of, agreement not to change or grow, I guess. So there was a lot of anger, right? There's a lot of anger. And there was a lot of beauty, right, as well. But what was leaving me was the people who had been my community and my support. So although there was a lot of beauty and redemption, people were like, thank you so much, this is amazing, from all over the world, it was my own community that was leaving me by the thousands.
The irony.
And so talk about abandonment issues. Like having thousands of people abandon you very publicly, and just lighten Facebook up. So anyway, all that to say, it didn't. I don't want people to hate me. I mean, I rather like people liking me. I'm not.
Claro.
Not a
masochist.
Yeah. So I'm a 7, and I like having fun and smiling and laughing and finding the good. And so it was hard on me. And I went to therapy is what I'm trying to say. I went to the Hoffman process, the Hoffman Institute in Northern California. And I was very afraid to go. I thought it was too new agey. I was still trying to hang on to some sort of fundamentals of my Christianity at that point. But I remember the day before I walked in, I was like, I actually broke into a church and went down to the altar and got on my knees. And I just prayed, like, I just told God, I'm like, I've given my life to try to do what's right. And like, I need help. And if you're not going to heal me and my heart, then I got to go to this thing, which now I'm like, it's fine. You're totally safe. But back then I thought I just told Jesus, like, I'm leaving you behind because I need healing and I don't know what to do. And it was transformative. I mean, what I processed there, and it's hard to really explain, but it's a 9-day process that just wrings you out. And I dealt with patterns from childhood and issues of my own development and failures as a leader and a father and a husband and all of these things. And so, that was incredibly transformative. And I left that place like just with no real attachment to outcomes at that point. It was like the part of my ego that had its ass kicked was like playing wounded bear for a while. And Hoffman allowed me to be like, yeah, that hurt, and grieve it, and then let it go and be like, hey, I'm okay. That hurt. But I know that I want to live with the outcome of what I chose to do, and I did it consciously. And so it was really nice. It was really transformative. And then probably the last one that I would say, that I have to say, frankly, because there's nothing that compares to it, is high dose psychedelic experience. I don't even know. I guess I'll pick the most epic one, which was 5-MeO DMT. 5-MeO DMT. I mean, basically, I don't know what year, maybe. Oh, it was when I had cancer. I guess. How did I skip that? So I had cancer. That's pretty big. But cancer helped me face my mortality in a way that I had never. I mean, you can't even pretend to try. Like when you have cancer, there's no escape. And I kind of became a bit of a, scientific materialist at that point. I was just like, I don't know, or care, whose religion is right or wrong, or as all I know is this may be the final chapter or not. Maybe I'll live. But either way, like I'm done arguing about bullshit that nobody knows for sure. And I kind of condensed my life philosophy down to this cute little portable phrase: life is a gift, love is the point. And now when people ask me, what do you believe? I'm like, that's pretty much it. Not a lot, but it's really sufficient for making choices. based on that as an ethic or what have you. So, but psychedelics basically took my materialism and exposed it as my new religion, as my new certitude. Like I thought, okay, now I know what is or isn't, basically, and it gave me a new sense of control. Well, high dose, especially 5-MeO DMT, I mean, I don't know how to describe it other than to say I went straight to God, or whatever we use the word God to point to.
Mm-hmm.
And Ryan couldn't come all the way. There was an essence that lives in Ryan that went all the way into the light, but I had to let go of a bunch of stuff. Again, it's impossible to describe a place without language, or an experience that has no language. But that's how I would describe the experience. And there was nothing missing. It was just bliss, unity, and no fear. And I can't tell you that it was real, although it's more real than this feels right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I came back thinking, well, I can't prove it to anybody, and nor do I really care to. But that's where I'm from. That's what I am. And that's what I'm going back to. And so it was another step towards just letting go of a lot of fear, and just realizing, like, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know if this is a simulation, all this 3D experience we're having. This is wild, man. I mean, I regularly wake up not on drugs going, what is going on? This is insane. And
I like that you make the clarification, like, you wake up.
I do sometimes don't do drugs. But I mean, every single time psychedelics have radically altered my sense of reality and my experience of connectedness to something. And again, God is an okay word for me. For some, it's triggering, but to the implicate order, to the radiance, to the singularity that gave birth to complexity. Like, I don't really need a particular name for it, but I know there is an experience in consciousness, or maybe as consciousness, where we touch something that I think, I mean, the more I've gone back and read Paul, I'm like, oh, I think this dude who I used to give a hard time, poor guy, I'm so mean to him, he touched this. He called it the Christ mystery, or, Christ. But I'm like, I think he gets caught up in these levels of heavenly realms. I'm like, dude, I've been there. And by the way, I can get you there at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday with about 4 grams of something.
It's really interesting I mean, this is the completely unknown realm to me. I mean, so I find it fascinating too. And I think there was I didn't finish watching it, but there's this kind of like a documentary on Netflix about psychedelics that just came out maybe some weeks ago. And
Have a good trip.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, it plays into some celebrities and people who were commenting on it. So that's definitely something I do find interesting. I definitely would like to dive into. Like you have. I mean, I think we could say that you have navigated through the realm of prosperity. Let me define prosperity in terms of success within the evangelical realm. Like even as a young person that you are, and as an even younger person that you were when you were quote unquote running a church, or like with a team of people running this successful environment. What did that do to you as a young person? I mean, just that in and of itself, as you were experiencing a success story in the evangelical realm, as you were walking in there without anticipating the moments of transition just yet, but as you're walking there, what did that feel for you? I mean, was it a quick spur of growth? I mean, did it feel overwhelming? How were you navigating that thing that was happening? Were you part of a denomination? Were you guys riding solo? What was? Because there's many elements there.
Yeah. Well, we started with the denomination, but they barely gave us any money, so we eventually were like, you know what, this is
What's the
like,
point?
yeah, why are we coming to these horrible meetings with people who want to do yesterday's thing?
Oh.
We're great. We're fine on our own. Um, and yeah, I mean, I would have to say that it's a mixed bag. Um, I've always been a little bit of a skeptic and a doubter about all things.
Mm-hmm.
That just got more intense as I got older. But I, hmm, I think that it was exciting, right? Like winning, basically. I mean, this is why people want to go to the hot, evangelicals hop around to the cool church. It's because people like winning. And they don't want to say it this way, but I mean,
Yeah.
that's really it. You want to be on the winning team. And you're like,
Got it.
all my friends go over here, they're winning. Let's win.
Yeah.
So I knew enough about that to know that there was a part of our success that was just the flavor of the month, and we got to enjoy it for a couple of years. And even back then, when I was still hardcore Christian, not hardcore enough for Mars Hill, which was across the water from us, but almost every weekend I had to argue with somebody from Mars Hill who wanted to tear apart my sermon at the end.
And I bet that in itself maybe gave you a sense of mission too. I mean, like that you're that you're
Yeah,
contrasting. You have at least something to contrast, kind
yeah,
of
exactly.
to.
I don't know why I argued with them. Now I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, just say I'm unbiblical. Stop trying to prove to them that I'm doing it biblically. Be like, yeah, great, I'm unbiblical.
You save a lot of
Oh,
time doing that.
yeah, gosh, I wasted so much time. So, uh, I think what I was trying to say is that it was exciting and we did really well. And I tried to put some safeguards in place because I grew up in a fast growing evangelical megachurch that my father was on staff at
Mm-hmm.
when I was a kid. And I saw enough shit behind the scenes that I was like, I can see how that can happen. And so I was like, no special green room for the pastors. Like I would sit at the front of the stage at the end and I would wait until everyone who wanted to talk to me could talk to me, you know?
So you try to remain accessible, I
Yeah,
mean, which is.
yeah. And do some things to avoid what I felt like I had seen. And having said that, I don't think I escaped all that. I think with success comes power, and
Mm-hmm.
you start to believe your own success. Like I know what I'm doing. Like I know what's going on. I'm smart, and I think that there's just something about power that it's just a human problem. Like I don't think I always handled that power very well. Um,
What do you think you were doing? Like, it's good that you mentioned Marcel. I totally forgot that,
that was the first time I've said that in years.
Mark Driscoll is the thing. I forgot about that. And I don't mean to demean. I mean, I just, as you focus on other things, you forget some things
Yeah,
exist. This is not
it's just not on the ticker anymore, right? All the time.
exactly. Exactly. It's not on the radar.
Yeah.
What things do what things do you remember that you were doing that were quite, even in the pre coming out phase? Let's call it the pre coming out phase, particularly with the whole LGBT issue, which
Yeah.
is quite a coming outness
Yeah.
to a lot of people. What things were you intentional? Like, you mentioned that realm of accessibility, which in the megachurch environment, like I went to Hillsong for a bit, and I remember what that was like back in Sydney. And I did not experience a realm of accessibility from all these leaders. I actually experienced a
Yeah.
realm of like the sanitization. It was very
Yeah, for sure.
sanitized.
Yeah.
So what were you maybe within the realm of mega churches? What were you trying to contrast and say, I see this being done here. I definitely want to do this a little bit different. It could be theological. It could be the praxis of the liturgy or whatever.
Yeah, I didn't find the academic parsing of words as very interesting. Um, and I wanted to create a community for people who just were not going to be, what's the word? I just know like so many of my friends that I graduated high school with, they're not reading, 6 books in a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then these sermons that were kind of hip between 2004 and 2014, um, they were so academic. It was like I just kept thinking, are we going to unpack first century Palestine for the next 3,000 years? Like, in order to understand what the word God means, are we going to have to dive into what a shepherd in Palestine was up to? Like, forever we're stuck talking about this. So I looked for metaphors and stories that spoke to the what I thought might be the heart of the point, rather than trying to ground everything in some sort of exegesis that's going to make Bible colleges proud. Like, I was like, there's plenty of churches that are trying to impress Christians so that the Christians can be like, I'm going to the most Christian church.
Credentials, yeah, kind of.
Nobody came to Eastlake because we had perfect theology. They can't, I swear to you, which is funny because people left because we had bad theology, right? About the LGBT or whatever. It's like, that's not what you came here. You came here
Why are you leaving now?
yeah, we had, well, I'll just say that for another question. You want to ask that one? But they came because we knew we did grace really well.
Mm.
We did grace really well. We had fun. We had so much fun. We loved to have fun. We laughed, and you didn't have to put on your church persona to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And because none of us were on staff. I mean, basically, I built a staff of people I wanted to hang out with. And I was like, if I want to hang out with these people, I think people are going to want to hang out with these people. And that's what grows it. It's just this vibe, this energy that you don't need to manufacture. It's just you get the right people, and they're just certain people who walk around, and there's a line of people behind them. And that's who I tried to hire, is people who were normal, who loved others. And I didn't care if they had ever read the Bible halfway through. I'm like, that's stuff that you can teach if necessary. I mean, the point is love, not mastery of biblical texts. And of course, now I believe that to a much higher degree. But back then I was like still trying to like hang out on the edge of like, yeah, we're for sure evangelical Christians. But, so that was some of the stuff we were trying to contrast. And, then the other just boring stuff like good music and not spending a bunch of money on dumb crap. We had folding chairs when we were a $7.5 million a year budget, and we used folding chairs for always. We had like steel garbage cans everywhere in the lobby, like from Home Depot. Like, we just didn't spend money on anything.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have offices like way back before that became a thing. We just never had. I think we had one small office in 2006. And then after that, we're like, let's not do this anymore. This is just a lot of space that sits around. So just some some stuff like that. And then just had a really small staff so that we were including and activating a ton of people in the shaping of what we were doing, and just empowering a ton of people without trying to create this, bunch of professional Christians, like you're just make it simple, love people. And
did you have at that time when you can maybe remember your church at its most affluent point, or at its most maybe at its peak? Was it a diverse demography, or
no, we looked like our community, meaning that we were that we were in. So there was diversity, but not like it was like the diversity of who lived there, but it wasn't the diversity of like Seattle, which was not far away, or what have you.
What do you recognize was then? Do you when you were like you were earlier commenting on those experiences that evolved, and as you were journeying, and then the conversations you were starting to have with yourself, and you were starting to kind of, I don't know if to say infiltrate it or just communicated it to your community. What were those? Do you remember maybe particular moments? Or I love hearing stories. I love hearing anecdotes. Do you remember maybe when Um, I mean, even maybe before shit hit the fan, when maybe a smaller shit hit the fan before the LGBT thing that you
Oh yeah.
were, and did you experience very tangible resistance?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, the biggest one was I had been. What the phrase we used on the leadership team was "slow drip." We're going to drip this in. Okay, people are just
How
going to
slow?
keep dripping
Yes,
it in.
it's
Yeah, you know.
relative though. How
Oh
slowly
my
were you
gosh,
doing it though?
we did not. We drove through. Yeah, but the
Yeah.
idea was that we're going to slow drip it. But that's just not my style. Like I just
Mm-hmm.
like rip the Band-Aid off. This is what we're doing. You're with us. It's cool. If you're not, I get it. But in late 2014, I had been planning to do a series on violence in the Old Testament,
Mm-hmm.
and um, at this point in my own journey, I was already pretty radically Anabaptist in my
Anti-war. All that.
pacifism. And I felt like there had been some good Anabaptist writers, and then even American, Dr. Greg Boyd, who had become a friend. And so I used his at this point the book was not released yet, but he wrote a monstrous book called The Crucifixion of the Warrior God, which is basically his work on nonviolent way of reading these, which
Is
I thought,
Greg Voigt from Minneapolis? Is it?
yeah, St. Paul, I think.
Yeah, a
Yeah,
pastor, no, as well.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, yeah.
yeah. Great guy. Oh my
Mm-hmm.
gosh.
Yeah, I met him some years ago.
Okay. Oh, he's just unbelievable genius. The book is incredible, and all respect to the dude. I needed that way of hanging on, but for me, well, actually, let's just stick with the time frame you were asking. Do you remember when it happened?
Mm-hmm.
At that point, that's where I was at, and I did a talk saying, this is a shadow. This is not God who commands genocide or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We have to reject these as texts that we need to
Like mandates.
emulate, yeah, or that we would ever need to worship a God who commands genocide. This is craziness, And so that was one of the first times that what I had been trying to do all year was push hell out of the mix. But I was taking my sweet time to go through first how Jesus didn't teach it. I did that
Mm-hmm.
from January forward, and people were getting upset. And it was funny how it was nationalism and Americanism, or whatever you want to call that, American nationalism that seemed to get irritated first.
Mm-hmm.
So I started with Jesus. Then I went through sort of some church history, how churches and different. We did this thing called Ancient Future Faith, and people have laughed because it was like the most eternal series that never ended. But my idea was that I want to show that there's so many ways to view this, and our particular heaven hell fixation right now is pretty new. And then by the fall, I wanted to hit directly these violence texts and say that we need to get away from weaponizing the Bible. This is what has caused a lot of violence. Because I knew if I could get people to be like, oh, let's really look at what the Bible is. It's not like God wrote a book.
Mm-hmm.
This is written by people. Then I could start to address the issue of LGBT and what are we really doing with these verses or whatever. So it's all thought through. But when I really started teaching like this thing that it says God says, God didn't say that.
Ooh,
that's where people were like, how can you say that, every scripture is God breathed, and and that was an intense season. And I remember having a leadership retreat meeting, going over the finances at that point, knowing that what was on the horizon was full affirmation of the LGBT community publicly. It was like, people are leaving now, but no one's going to notice because we were spread all over 8 campuses, but we could see the trend. We're like, oh, people are leaving over what we're trying to do here. And when people tell the story now, usually they race. In 2015, you guys made a statement, and then all these people left. But really, it was all of 2014. I'm making people feel bound. They're all sort of socially taking cues from each other. Like, are we all still going here? And, I think, so the people who are really into being my sort of cheerleaders, they're like, Ryan, he's great or whatever. So the homeostasis was destabilized, but it hadn't fallen apart yet. And by the time January hit, it was like, that's what we thought. You don't respect the Bible. And even people who clapped on the day we made a full affirmation statement. I mean, it was a standing ovation.
Claro. Yeah, imagine.
Well, guess what happens?
But
4 weeks later, you look down your row and all your buddies are gone. So you don't leave because you have an issue with LGBT affirmation. You leave because you want to go to church with your friends, and this place is now losing. And remember how people love to win. And so there becomes this social aspect of leaving that, I mean, I can't tell you how many people I talked to who were like, I used to go there, loved it. I didn't leave because of that. It's just all my friends, and that's just part of how we, sort of organize ourselves as human beings. We're pack animals. And that was interesting to watch it all play out like that.
And do you recall that? Do you recall the moment where, like, you're pointing to that moment where you had that standing ovation where you spoke out? Was that precipitated? Like, did you feel like was that within that plan, that framing, that scheduling framing, or did you feel like you just could not keep on holding it back any longer and you spoke out sooner, or is that time frame that you really wanted to?
No, well, see, I almost said CNN. Time Magazine released the article early. So that actually was a little bit of like, oh, crap. So that was out of our control. And so it came out before we said anything. Time Magazine outed us first.
How did they know? Just interviews before?
Well, I had done an interview, yeah. And we're going to do a series here. She came out a couple weeks before, did the whole thing. She was great, and wrote a great piece on it. But because of, there were a number of different things going on, and they always are timing, like, okay, we'll put this article out now and whatever. But Charlie Hebdo, that whole fiasco, right? That whole tragedy happened, and things got shifted around. And so anyway, so we ended up playing like some real, catch up with that. And people felt like, oh, we got sidelined. But the thing is, we had been playing a video at the beginning of our services for years that we had gotten permission to use from Highlands Church in Denver, which is sort of this ethos that we no longer use, but we used back then, that included the line, gay or straight here, there's no hate here. And people had been leaving over that, right? Like, what do you mean there's no hate here, right? Which is a funny thing but I credit to them because they could smell it.
Claro.
Right?
They know where it's going.
Yeah, they know where it's going. And you know what? I respect that they asked and left over it, because the truth is I was too scared to do it back then. There's a lot to this that had to do with my own need to let go of protecting my staff. I was so worried I was going to cost them all their livelihoods. And, I resigned to them in mid 2014. I just said, look, guys, the easiest thing you can do is vote me off the island right now, because what I'm about to do, we're all going to be unemployed. And I said, let's just take an anonymous vote and I'll get out of here. But if I stay, I can't not say this, because what I've realized is I built this huge mega church and all of this was because of what pushed me to do it earlier than I had planned was one of our friends on staff came out, and she was like, hey, I'm dating, and there was this other friend of ours, and I realized, and she was crying thinking I was going to fire her.
Claro.
I was like, she knows me. Like she's in the staff meeting conversations where we talk about this particular talking point, right? And she's afraid that I'm going to fire her. And then it just made me realize there's got to be people in our church who love coming to this like socially liberal church, but they're just waiting for that day when they're told they can't be baptized or whatever. So that's what kind of got me to the point where I was like, I got to say something publicly. There's too many people suffering in silence, wondering how safe they are. And so anyway, I told the staff, like, I have to stay. I realize I have this huge church that essentially it's kind of like this rabid dog. It's my dog and it's rabid. And either I need to heal the dog or put the dog down.
Put him down, yeah.
It's a danger. It's a danger to kids in our children's ministry who are, non-binary or what have you. And the churches, I don't have to go into the statistics on what the church has done to LGBT youth, but that was the point. If I stay, I'm going to do this. And everyone sort of like stood up like, I'm Spartacus. Everyone is like, no way, dude, we're doing this. We're going down together. So we went for it.
Dude, there's an interesting phenomenon because we can touch on statistics, and as you can point to the aftermath of that, you would say, well, now you don't have the resources, now you don't have all these things that you had that you could impact community, and then you can play into this rationale of, well, how much do you lose, how much do you win? So what's that internal process like of knowing of maybe acknowledging a sense of urgency to approach this, and also have a foregone conclusion and a whole story told that is going to lead to this, as far as that which sustains this
Hmm.
organization. Why is it that you feel it needs, because there's a heap of churches that will use the rationale of, kind of like, how the military was before, don't ask, don't tell, and they see that rationale with a whole, like, with a lot of logical, like, they're like, that makes sense, we're not
Yeah.
hurting anyone. But what is it that makes this urgent enough that is not just an impulse, like, oh, I'm just such an anarcho idealist that I gotta speak out no matter if I'm gonna lose it. But what's really behind it that you weigh in? Yeah, this is no surprise, I'm gonna lose all this, but I still, I think that kind of plays into maybe a little bit what Jesus said, like, count it all as a loss and gain. I think was it Paul that said that? Um,
Yeah. Well,
that
lose your life and find it as Jesus.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Count it as
yeah.
loss as Paul. Yeah.
So what is it that materializes that urgency, that I
Yeah.
still see this maybe as gain rather than loss to
Yeah. That's easy. Two things. Number one, relationship. Like I wasn't gonna. I just couldn't even. It would never cross my mind. Like, well, I guess we do have to fire her. Like, no way. And now what? What? Tell her she can't talk about it? That she's in love with someone? Kind of sick. Like, I'm not going to play this. Relationship is everything. Like, the people who are married to someone in the Black community right now, there's no question for them what they're going to do. Like, this is imperative that they get engaged and involved and invested. They are engaged, involved, and invested. Relationship changes it all. It's only when you have distance,
Mm-hmm.
aka lack of relationship, that you can go through these complex explanations for why this doesn't need to cost you, or where we protect assets and property over people. It's just silly. Losing a big evangelical church, like, what is that? It's a nothing. Nobody died. Just this way of organizing went away, which wasn't even a thing. It's not even a material thing. It was an idea. And if that idea can't sustain itself by me living in integrity with my own perspective, right or wrong, right? That's probably the second thing, right? Is I would have split in half. I can't pretend that I toe this line. I had been doing that for a while, and it was murdering me. And I'm like, I'm changing, and I have to tell. And I also think that's respecting my congregation, saying, this is where I'm at. I'm guessing you guys think I'm here, and now I'm here. So you don't have to agree with me, but you should know, because I'm guessing it's a deal breaker for some of you. I wasn't trying to be an ass. I was just like, hey, I should tell you the truth. And I know plenty of evangelical pastors who feel the same way, who don't tell you. And it's funny, in this experience, I think I learned that people just would rather you don't tell. Because again, just play the role, bro. Just run the tapes. Tell us Jesus died for our sins and we're on the right team. And let's pray for everybody else. And let's do short-term mission trips so we don't get too involved in relationship, because that would mess up the plans. So relationship is really everything. I mean, parents who haven't been to a Pride weekend in their whole life are immediately at Pride right when their kid comes out. They're like, holy shit. Home. Yeah, right? So it's like, until you fall in love with something or someone, what happens to that being, that person, that ecosystem, that particular forest? It's hard to care, and it's easy to explain away its its own rights and importance. So
how can things, and this is, I invite you to reflect on that, to share with me maybe your thinking on this. How can things hit home when they don't hit home, or when we keep things at such an arm's length, to say the least, to make to keep them from hitting home?
mhm,
How,
yeah.
how, how can we how can we practice the art of allowing things to hit home even if they're not hitting home? I guess maybe that's the word for that's what empathy maybe means, but do
Yeah,
you
well, compassion is to suffer with, right? So um, I I think we have to enter into the suffering of the other. Um, it's so unsexy. It's just like the opposite. The American dream, is all about individual pursuit of pleasure. So there's this rampant individualistic narcissism, which we're like, oh, on the liberal side, which of course people will push me over there, right? Well, we're so shocked about Donald Trump got elected, and meddling from Russia aside, we are a narcissistic country that
hmm
elected the most narcissistic president in our history. This is who
makes
we
sense?
are. Yeah, we're racist, self-absorbed jerks. And to me, it's like, oh, all this. I don't like Donald Trump either, but it's just funny to me how, I mean, even in one of my ayahuasca ceremonies, I had a vision of him in the ceremony with me, and I was like, yeah, and he was puking, and which is what happens on ayahuasca. And I remember thinking, like, yeah, you piece of shit, like, you fucking do your work. And then the vision shifted, and I was Donald Trump throwing
hmm
up, and the medicine was like showing me, like, this, everything you hate in him is in you,
mm
and as long as you continue to externalize this, it will perpetuate. You know, I don't know why I brought that up, but just
Oh, it
of
makes
course,
makes a lot of
as I
sense.
answer
It's
it.
a reflection of society, a reflection
Yeah,
of
yeah. So
where.
there's this narcissism and this sort of addiction to me. So when you ask how do we make it hit home when it doesn't hit home, well, one, we're going to be combating the narrative we all adore. Like, our favorite thing about America is like freedom, right? So when you
Mm.
tell people to stay home and put on a mask, they're like, fuck you, like, we're Americans. We're all a bunch of John Waynes who are going to do everything alone and not need anybody. And here we are. I was thinking about it the other day. I was riding my bike through this neighborhood, and I was thinking about how close everybody's house is. Like, there's just houses everywhere, right? And we don't know each other. Like,
Mm.
we're closer than some villages that I visited in the jungle of Central Africa. There are these huts that are further away than our houses, and they are always together, right? Everything is together. They recognize their interdependence. We're closer here, and we don't even talk to each other.
Yeah, closer and
So
further.
there's a way of organizing, and that's what I think's happening right now. And there's so much to say about that, but there's this moment in history. There are ways of organizing and ways of thinking we're not letting go of them. They're being ripped from our hands. And until we let go of those things, we're going to keep suffering. It's like holding on to something heavy while you're drowning. Like, we don't want to let go of our individualism. We don't want to let go of, normal. Everyone's dying to get back to normal. Normal is going to kill us.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it has already, so it's going to continue
Yeah. Oh, it's
doing
going to get
doing that.
worse. We have set a banquet of consequences before us, and we're at the table now. And now we're like, I don't know if I want to eat the stop driving my car so often. Well,
Mm.
then you're going to eat the air is unbreathable meal. Like, we're not going to change until we hurt. And that's why we've had to riot to get people arrested who are caught on video murdering.
Yeah, it's
And
disparate.
we're all like, I can't believe the system. We have to do that. That's how broken it is. That's how broken we are. Stop externalizing the system. Yes,
Scapegoating.
it's a system, but it is alive in all of us that we externalize evil. The fact is none of us want to change. None of us want to change. And all of us are going to have to change, either by changing forms, death, or by changing our hearts. And that's going to come with what I was starting to say, which is to suffer with. We're going to have to choose the opposite of individualism, the opposite of narcissism, and choose to take on the suffering that is not mine. Why would you do that? Love. That's the only one reason.
And I think that might also play into, I mean, as you mentioned, obviously, the notion of individualism, that we are individuals, is so normal to us, is so well ingrained within us, that it is a foreign notion and idea. And I think the pandemic kind of countered or challenged that by, I guess, commenting and saying, we're not as individuals as we think we are. There is an interconnectedness between all of us. But as I say, our quote unquote natural inclination, because it's just the atmosphere in which we have been raised, is that we're individuals. And the interconnectedness goes out the window. You mentioned something about change, and I'd really before we resume conclude, I really want you to touch about change in realms of when I found out about East communities already, as I'm out agnostic atheist, but I still find some connection with the theological, religious, philosophical forum. And I found out about the East Lake community in Washington. And I saw one of your services maybe a year ago, and the format is quite is not out of this world. I mean, there's music, there's a platform,
yeah.
But there was something in the content, like using fragments, using quotes from the Dalai Lama, using quotes from the. So tell me how that started, kind of inserting itself. That sense of maybe that some could maybe compare it to like Unitarian Universalist, kind of that plurality.
Sure.
How did that start going into, and what did that do? The pros, the cons, even though that's a relative thing, but
well, it's where I was already. And so after I went to Hoffman and realized, okay, like what's happened has happened, and I planned on this, but I could finally let go of the hurt from it and some of the personal betrayals of people who had been close to me. Then it was like, okay, let's just do what I would want to do. Like, what kind of a thing, forget church. If I could go to something once a week to remind myself that I'm a part of a larger unfolding, and that I can't really be the best version of myself without community, then what would I want to be a part of? And growing up, the church was great for me. I mean, besides terrorizing me with the idea that all my friends were going to hell, pretty big negative, it offered me a sense of community, right? And support. And so all of those things, getting together once a week with other people to try to be a better human being and to share your resources and to inspire yourself to live well. And in the middle of tragedy, like, hey, I see you, you need a hug, like all that kind of stuff. That's great. That is good shit right there. Let's do that. So when I got finished with the Hoffman Institute, the rest of the fear of like, who's going to leave now was just over. Like, who cares? Like, who's not going to leave is me. I'm not going to leave me anymore. Trying to make sure that everyone thinks I'm biblical enough or likes my church or whatever. That finally completely died. What's funny is people thought that was dead. That's why I did the LGBT thing, because I was like, fuck everybody. No way, man. It was killing me inside. I was terrified, but it was the right thing to do. After Hoffman, it was like, okay, what would I want to do? Well, who was I reading? This is who I was reading. I was reading the Dalai Lama. I was reading the Tao. I was reading Bertrand Russell and Sam Harris and finding beauty and, to me, religious concepts, and to me, the words are just so confusing to people. But what does it look like to cultivate a life of meaning and a set of symbols, because we are symbolic creatures? we need a symbol set, which it sounds like that's still meaningful to you, right? There's a particular symbol set that comes from Christianity. And I would agree with this. I think the Jesus story speaks to me deeply. I have no dog in the fight of whether any of it's true. Jesus could have never existed for all I care. He's just as important as ever.
Got it.
But this idea of death, burial, resurrection, losing your life to find it, like these are consciousness expanding things that can still pull us into a future we have yet to realize. So yeah, I mean, that's how it started was, hey, let's do songs that are meaningful. They don't have to have the word God or Jesus in them at all, but do they speak to what it means to walk as a 3D human being in this dimensional reality, and the joys and the pains, the loneliness and the companionship, the yearning, the failure, the forgiveness, and the promise of new life. Like, let's do those kinds of songs. And so we got to be like, hey, what kinds of artists do those things? And instead of making it like they did a secular song, in the middle of the service as a special thing, it was like, no, we do any kinds of songs written for a church setting or for a rock show or whatever, because we're about content that helps us to live into our full humanity, which is I really, this is the way I see the teachings of Jesus, is to live into our full humanity.
Before that, did you have another coming out moment, like with your like, I just no longer believe in this framing of
probably like 12 of those. I mean, every time I spoke, I was just being like, look, this is where I'm at in my process. Like, theism had died for me. Any need to like reference the scriptures as a way to prove my point, to me, it's like reading Harry Potter now, like, which I don't do. So I don't know why I said Harry Potter.
As what we would maybe think. I haven't read it either. So we would maybe think it would be like.
My point, the way I used to grab illustrations to put in while I use the Bible to argue my point, that's over now. Now I say, like, there's an interesting story, from whatever, from the Lord of the Rings that speaks to this. This is a truth that transcends, evidence or whatever. We know this as an experience. That's how I would reference that. And so, for sure, that whole idea of having to embrace a magical world of supernatural God beings who are going to sort of answer your prayers. I had a couple of messages where I was like, I'm out on that.
The interventionist sort of.
Yeah. So there are probably a few more. And that's the difficulty with going from an evangelical megachurch and then going on a journey, right? It wasn't like, hey, we're now even, I've seen churches that are evangelical that become affirming and have some bumps along the road since 2015, so after us. And sure, we may have softened the ground for people to follow us, but also it helps if you stay evangelical Christian afterwards. There are plenty of people from the LGBT community who left our church because we didn't stay evangelical Christian. They were evangelical Christians who were looking for an affirming church. We became an affirming church, but left Christianity, or at least a particular version of it. To me, when I read the supposed words of Jesus, I'm like, I can, that makes sense to me. Like, I'm down with this, right? It's all the interpretations and the dogmatizing of particular metaphysical ideas from the first century that I'm no longer interested in.
Was that gradual transitioning? Was there any moment that you can remember? Post coming out with the LGBT issue, was there any? And like you said, we work with symbols and we work with reminders. I think that's what birthdays are, and they tangibilize some things, and we work in that realm. Do you have anything that you might be able to visit in a time frame where you? And I know it's kind of. It's sabotaging the journey and the gradual, but that you stopped being Christian, that you were like, this at this point it was just like having to reinforce everything with the Bible. Be like, I got to go to the
Yeah.
Bible to get some sort of reinforcement. Where
Yeah.
that was there any point where that, like you were talking about the liturgy, the song, the singing, that you hear in many churches, you get this triumphalism, the
Mhm.
triumphalism. Was
Yeah.
there
We
any
know the truth.
particular point that you're like, I don't think we would fall into that Christian framing any longer? Was there
I
a
don't know if it was
timing?
a point,
Mhm.
but I'm pretty sure that by 2017 it was all over for me. Like I finished from the Hoffman Institute and fear was gone. So the
Mm-hmm.
whole time I'd been like afraid, like I think this is the love and inclusivity and of that was the whole point, right? Like let's purify Christianity to the place where it's like really about Jesus. And and then all of 2016, I went back and with my Bible college classes way in the background, I finally was like, what do we really know about the Bible? So 2016 was a slow process of unlearning some of these supposed certitudes. And there's an experience that you go through where January, my friend Peter tells it this way, and I think it's helpful. January 24th, we were great Christians. We were in good standing. And January 25th, we were out over
Mm.
the LGBT thing. And once you experience life on both sides of that, you're like, and the way people treat you, you're like, really? This is what it's all about? It's all about, like, you read the whole Bible and you get to the end, you're like, okay, I get it. Don't be gay. That's the main thing, clearly, Like, if that's how people treat each other in this group, when you have a difference of opinion over something, like I remember having a prominent member in the church text me and be like, I heard you would do a gay wedding. And I texted her back. I was like, I thought you were already married. And that did not go over very well. But when you
It's good to play into
experience
that.
that stuff, it's just like you're already kicked out.
Mm.
Once you're kicked out, you're like, they're not even Christians anymore. So actually, I thought I was.
Mm.
And then when you're finally kicked out and you're outside and you're like, well, they don't think we're Christians anymore, then it stops mattering, and you can actually ask yourself, do I want to be one of those anyway?
Mm-hmm.
Because the membership benefits are no longer conferred, right? I can no longer flash my card at the door. So once the card is meaningless because they won't let me in, then you start asking, should I keep carrying this fucking card around?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If the card doesn't matter, then does the label matter? What does it mean to be this? And what do I really, and all of 2016 was a process of all of us as a staff team going, like, what do you really, like at the end of the day, I got on board here to love people. And I feel like all that's happening is we're taking more steps further into love. And it's actually been really costly. It might even have felt like a little bit of a social crucifixion. And it certainly was a crucifixion of an old identity. I think I don't care what we call this, and let's keep trusting the journey, And I think what helped again was there was enough loss that there was nothing left to lose, in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
from having the label and not having the label. And so by 2017 it was dead, and then I got diagnosed with cancer. And so that faced mortality. It's one thing to say I don't believe in God, like I'm sure you're familiar with Pete Rollins, but Pete's a buddy of
See,
mine, and I love
see,
how
see.
he says the atheist kid doesn't really lose God until his parents stop believing. He can, fuck God, I don't believe that shit. But if he has believing parents, you don't really lose God until the parents come. You're like, yeah, neither do we. And suddenly, that atheist 17-year-old kid feels the loss of God for the first time.
Huh.
So it's a different dynamic to be like, okay, I don't think I believe any of this stuff anymore, and then get cancer. Because
Oh.
that's when you find out what you really believe. Am I going to start praying to Jesus to heal me? Like all that kind of stuff. And that's when I knew I was really out. Because I was like, I refuse to worship a God who will heal me at this point, a 38-year-old white male, upper middle class with good insurance. And 800,000 kids are going to die of diarrhea, but I'm going to pray that he heals me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm out on that shit. And that's when I knew I was like, okay, I'm definitely out now because I'm under the pressure. And what's really in me should be coming out. And what was really in me was, I've had a good life. I hope I survive this. I want to spend my time loving, and that's all that matters to me. And
In
that's when I knew,
in that realm, like to it's and I don't think I've ever had this happen to me, like to that. Well, I've never had cancer, to that intensity of the things that you hear happen to other people, and
hmm
then you experience that familiarity of hearing it happen to another person.
mm.
How is it to hear it happen to you?
Yeah, I mean, surreal. I remember hearing the word on the phone, cancer, and feeling like I left my body. Like I remember the guy talking a little, but I heard nothing else. And I just fell down on the bed and I don't know, I just went numb for a second. Like, and then, and then after I hung up with him, just sort of gently crying. Like, I'm 38 years old. This last couple of years have been hell. And now I have cancer. And I was just like, I don't know. You don't plan your life like that. I don't know how to describe it other than it's hard. It was hard to hear. But what's interesting is I had been taking a Raja Yoga class at this temple up the road from my house that was in the lineage of Paramahansa Yogananda.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the affirmations that week of my class, well, the affirmation that week was, I accept whatever comes my way as an opportunity for growth.
Oh
And what
wow.
was interesting was that was one of the first things that hit my head was I accept, because I had actually been rehearsing it all week. I'm like, I love this. This is going to be really healthy for me. Let's make this a practice. And then I got that, and it was like, I accept whatever comes my way as an opportunity for growth. And that really set the tone for my whole cancer journey. It was like, all right, I'm not going to waste my time pushing against reality. Like, I have cancer. Okay, I accept that. I think I'm going to be okay. Like, it's going to be shitty and all that stuff, but they caught it at stage 2, and I should be okay. They know how to handle my kind of cancer, but I didn't know for sure.
Claro.
And
Mm.
so it's just like, okay, here we go. This will shape me. And the good thing about that was, because of what I had gone through the previous few years, I knew that difficulty and suffering is a crucible for transformation. And so I think what I went through the years previous was sort of like boot camp for cancer. It was like, okay, I know how to handle this. This is an invitation to go inward. This is a personal quest that I'm being asked to undertake, and I want to come out the other side of this more gentle, more humble, more loving. Um, and yeah, I think that's what happened. I hope that's what happened. I do know that my teenage daughter definitely says that, those years of my life, I changed, that me and my wife changed dramatically through the pain. And to me, that's, besides all the people who found hope and healing through what transpired through the church, just at a personal level, like, I'm grateful for the suffering, because I think my ego needed to be carved down dramatically in ways that I wouldn't have been able to initiate through success, failure and humiliation, and seeing the ways I had abused my power or gotten cocky. I don't know, just assumed I had all the answers. All that stuff fell away, and that hurt. But it was good for me.
You mentioned being part of that practicing that mantra
Mm-hmm.
of allowing things to transform you.
Mm-hmm.
How, what things I mean, other than that mantra, or maybe how did that mantra traduce pragmatically, or how did that mantra traduce in praxis to look at that reality that you're in, and you have a family, you have kids. Did did the idea that did the idea of no longer being there pass by, and what did you, I mean, how did you put those together, the idea of, okay, this is an existing possibility, but there's also the existing possibility that I am going to be around. How did that yin and yang, how did you manage those two, and like not pitying yourself, not cocooning yourself, or maybe not either embracing a toxic positivity, or like
Yeah. Good
I'm really
question.
intrigued because it's
Yeah.
I would like to know for myself as well.
Yeah. Um, well, first thing I'll say is my cancer journey is shorter than like some people I know who are in it for years treatment. So I won't belittle their experience
Hmm.
by trying to be the authority on this. You know, I did 6 poisonings. That's what I call them when you get your um, chemo in through this port that I had installed in my chest. So maybe part of it was it didn't last very long. You know, I don't know. It felt like fucking eternity to me, you know, and it was horrible every time and terrible. And for sure, I thought about my kids. This I don't know if I'll be around. You know, people go from second or um, stage. You know, they go from stage 2 to stage 4 overnight. You know, I don't have any guarantees. So certainly that crossed my mind. But I do know that I was very committed to surviving and to not getting negative. Like I'm like, I just know it's not going to serve me, and I'm not gonna. What if I fucking die? Am I going to be miserable the last year of my life? No way. Like, why would I leave on that note? Like, you know, I may not be in control, but I can control this. I can control the way I go out because this is how people are going to remember me. This is how my kids, you know, these are going to be moments that people will remember. And I don't want people to suffer any more than necessary, and my kids, and so I think that was part of it was a refusal to go down the negative path.
Hmm.
Um, I also, you know, I wasn't alone. I had family support, and although, you know, another great part of this was when I had cancer is when I realized there's very few people's opinions I should give a shit about. Because when you have cancer, you find out who's really in your life.
Hmm.
Some people will text or call because it eases their own guilt. You know, some people are like close to you, but they don't know what to do around death, and so you won't see them because it's too uncomfortable for them. They are not ready to face their mortality, and you're just a reminder of theirs. It has nothing to do with you. It's something personal. But again, what I learned was, shit, man, don't ever waste your time worrying about what people think of you. I'm worried about my wife, my kids, maybe a handful of close friends, but that's at a layer out of that. But besides that, it doesn't matter. Like, you have to live in your own integrity. That's it. And I had spent a lot of time worried about what thousands of people think,
Hmm.
you know, and how to keep this. And cancer just got rid of that. You know, there's a lot of people who want to take up some real estate in your mind. Make sure it's the people who will walk you through cancer, because everybody else, it's not worth, you know, squashing your own inner fire for. And then the last thing I'll say is I also just willpowered my way through it. And the reason I know that is because in 2018, January, was a couple months after I got cleared. And I'm still getting blood treatment checks every 5 months. I have another one here in a couple weeks. But I went on a vision quest in the desert of California. It's a 14-day experience, 4 days of which you're totally isolated and alone and fasting, sitting in basically a 20-yard space.
Hmm.
And as soon as I got to my solo spot for those 4 days and the fast and all that, I put down my pack. And as soon as I was in that space and I knew I would be alone for 4 days, I cried for at least a day straight. And I could feel the grief and the weight of one, what my body went through,
Hmm.
but two, of having to be strong for my children, for my wife, for my staff, friends, and congregation. And I could finally feel and let pass through me needing to be strong. It was just like I finally was in a space where I could be weak and just let Ryan feel the fear and the gratitude for living, for surviving. And so, I mean, when you ask the question, what got me through, but at least part of it was that loyal soldier that was like, hold it together, when we're through, then we can let go. And I didn't realize that I hadn't sort of had that cathartic release until I was on that vision quest. And it's not why I went on it. I went on it because I was turning 40 and I was like, what's the second half of my life going to look like? I was looking for a message from the universe, right? But apparently what I really needed to do was just let go of grief, grief of the way my life went.
Part of a message.
Yeah.
I mean, wow, man, like, I listen to your stories and there's so much that I'm taking notes of. Like, in a very pragmatic, but in a very vulnerable sense too. Like I hear, like I hear you. So last two more questions I have for you. There's a last question that I always have for sir for my
Yeah.
for the people who join me here, and before I get to those questions, I have enjoyed this conversation so much. I have
Oh, me too. Thanks for inviting.
um where do you find yourself now? Like this space. Where do you find yourself? I mean, you commented a little bit about the use of psychedelics and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
ayahuasca.
Mm-hmm.
Este, where do you find yourself in your voyage of quote unquote spirituality? And are you still in relation to the church as a pastor, or is that like
Yeah.
completely long gone?
Yeah. Okay. Um, so easy question. I'm still in relationship with the church and I speak sometimes, rarely. But I'm not in leadership at the level I was. So they're Peter and Kristen, who I've worked with for years. They run it
Hmm.
and make all the decisions, and I told them that I'm available to help as much as I can. But nobody works there full time anyway, and hasn't really for a while. Um, One, because we don't have the finances, and two, it's a small church now. So
Hmm.
really, more people watch online or listen online than show up in real time or in physical. Actually, nobody is right now, right? COVID. So we may end up just turning it into
You
that. I
have
mean,
become an online church.
yeah, exactly, like everyone. So that may be the future. I don't know. So that's my relationship to it now. Um, what I have been doing is spiritual direction and some, basically helping people shape a personal spirituality, which is what I didn't realize I had been doing for the last 10 years.
Hmm.
But so I work with either atheists or Christians or Muslims or whatever, and it's sort of like an interfaith spiritual direction, and not to tell people what to believe, but to work with their own inherent value set as a way of making sacred um, paths and practice and symbol sets that give meaning to their life. Because I know we can't live without meaning. We're meaning machines, and we need a story to live out and live in. And so that's what I primarily do. Where I'm at personally, as it relates to,
Before you get to that, like
yeah,
how would that look like? Let's say I'm a Muslim person and I come to you, like what,
yeah,
within the
yeah,
confidentiality of everything, how would that look like? Just to kind of color that up
yeah.
for me, for example, and everyone is watching.
So, um, you know, a friend of mine who does similar work calls it spiritual companionship. And I like that phrase as well, although all spiritual direction, spiritual companionship, it's all terrible. Like there's no perfect phrase for it. Because it used to be like a village elder or a medicine man or things like that. And
Shaman, or I
our
guess, yeah.
culture, yeah, our culture just doesn't have this role anymore. Um, so if it begins with getting to know someone's story. So creating first a container, right? So to get out of the parts of the mind that our modern culture makes us live inside of. And so we
Hmm.
just begin with breath work to just calm the nervous system down so we can access some deeper reaches of what I would call soul, but I don't mean that in any particular metaphysical sense that anyone needs to believe anything. And then it's about getting to know a story, because everyone's in a context, and that happens to be maybe not even the story of their life, but the story they're telling themselves about their life at least. And then getting to know what are some of the symbols that they use now. Like, what do they believe in? Like, what gives their life meaning? What's their sense of where things are headed? How's that working for them? You know, sometimes people say, "Oh, these are the things I believe," and like people like who the way I used to order my life in scientific materialism, I knew a bunch of things, right? These are things I know, and then it becomes a question of, and this is the way I like to work. I'm only interested in if it works pragmatically. Like, are you happy? Because if you're not, then let's play with these beliefs a little bit, and in a way that doesn't require the assassination of your mind, but to appropriately place the intellect in a cascading ordering of windows of knowing. Because we have so privileged the mind in the West that we are essentially starving. Again, I don't mean this in any sense of belief, but we're starving what I would call the soul. Is there an eternal soul that goes on? Who knows? I have a particular leaning, which I don't know if you want to go there now, but basically,
you're free to go wherever.
okay. Well, I'll just finish by saying that's what I work with. Is I want to look at, what is your symbol set? What are your language pieces? How would you order your ultimate life values? Help them see, are you living into these things? Because sometimes the reason we're not happy is because we have a set of values that we're not living out. That's what happened to me. 2014, I was finally done with what I'd been doing, which is living out a value set called evangelical Christianity that was insulting my soul. And it got to a point where it was physically wearing my body down, and I had to make some changes. So I help people basically work through that. And I think there's a subset of people who I get about 30% of my clients from, which is people who have left Christianity but don't know what to do with the vacuum. They don't know what to do with the void. And so there's this nihilistic despair that can creep in that I don't think is necessary. There's just not a lot of guides who help people make that transition. And so it doesn't have to be as messy or lonely as, for instance, it was for me. And so that's what I help people with.
Oye, that sounds, how Puerto Ricans would say, that sounds very chévere, muy chévere. Do you know Bart Campolo?
Oh yeah. He's
And cause,
spoken at East like a few times. Love him. Good,
and
good,
yeah,
good dude.
I hear you speak and I hear him speak, and there's like definitely a level of parallel uh,
Totally.
experiences. And
Yep.
man, it sounds super fascinating and super interesting. Like I definitely would like to behind the scenes to follow up with you on that
Yeah, sure.
particular department. Um, and I like to ask everyone who's been here if as a final question, and I'll leave you the last word on that. If you could if you could visualize a form of a time capsule of sorts, and this time capsule will enclose your life experiences, or what you might reconcile as things worth sharing to describe this humanoid project to not necessarily a next generation, but maybe a next species that will come later on in life, and they'll find this time capsule to kind of be able to visualize what life was like here back then, now, in the whatever amount of decades you live here. What things do you find are relevant enough to both describe the phenomena of experience and also emphasize on the things that you recognize were of value? What things would you put in there? It could be tangible things, could be thoughts, could be abstract, could be whatever. And you have the last word, my friend.
Okay. Well, just a simple question like that.
Of course, to close things off.
What would I leave a potential new species to express what things were like at this moment?
And what things were important to you? Some people might say beauty, the things that resonate beauty to them.
Hmm. That's a tough one for me, man. Maybe I'm taking it too
No,
seriously.
you're good. You're good. It should be
Um,
taken seriously.
mhm. Yeah, I don't I don't have. I guess my personal take on humanity is that we're a transitional species, and I'm not necessarily certain that life requires our record.
Mm,
we, if we survive what we have on order presently, then whatever we have of value will endure.
mhm,
Um, we have a way of cutting to the essentials when forced to. And I think anything that is of enduring value, anything that could be considered possibly an absolute truth, um, it's in no danger of going away. So, to me, a container would be more of a theme restaurant, right?
mhm.
It's the importance of a time capsule of trinkets is not going to serve uh, either whoever we become or whoever takes over after us. Um, I don't know that there's a lot to bring to offer forward other than maybe our cautions that the addiction to the self is it's far more than a delusion. Um, it's been our it's been of course an incredible evolutionary leap to be self-aware and to take the experience of conscious awareness and reflect back on the beauty of the universe. There's no one else to our knowledge yet who can behold the beauty of the universe, and that is amazing. But we haven't quite stabilized in self-conscious awareness enough to move outside of the addiction to self. And
Hmm.
so the very thing that is our crowning glory, we can see. We are the universe seeing the universe. Amazing. But we're still stuck over identifying with our particular incarnation of consciousness. And that's killing us. So I don't know where that's headed, but if we can solve that, if we can transcend the over-identification with incarnation, or a particular incarnation, or separate incarnation, then we could be on to solving some of our issues for sure.
Ryan, no, thank you. Thank you for this time.
Yeah, man. I'm
I
happy
value
to.
this time so much because one, we have never talked in real
Yeah.
life person before. This is the
Yeah,
first time that we are having a face to face in digital pixelation
absolutely.
form. But nevertheless, it's I find it very valuable and very
Oh, good.
enriching.
Thank you. Wonderful. I'm glad. I hope it's helpful.
So muchas
It was
gracias.
fun.
I hope you're safe. I hope you continue to this journey of deconstruction and this journey of just living
Thank you.
and
I plan to.
phenomenal. So thank you to the people that were passing by who came from the
Mhm.
beginning, stayed till the end.
Yeah.
Muchas gracias. And I like to close with this thought of a former Puerto Rican psychic that used to close all his segments by saying mucha paz y mucho amor. So until next time, my friends, and see you tomorrow. Have a good one.